and our topic for today in the show called Alhidaayah is science and technology. As the recap, last week we looked at the foundations of science. What is science? And we said science is knowledge that is soundly established. It is free from guesswork and the rest. And we looked at a number of things that define science. Allow me again remind you that this program comes to us every Monday from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock. And we shall be interacting with so many experts and students of knowledge as well on different topics. So, being science and technology, we have an expert in computer knowledge as well as a student of Islamic knowledge, Brother Ssekalema Hamzah, who is a lecturer at the Islamic University in Uganda. Brother Ssekalema, please say salam to the viewers and we see how to begin the show today, inshallah.
Now, our viewers, we greet you with the greatest greeting, that assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So that greeting is essentially the greeting of believers. It is used both here in the world and in the heavens.
In the heavens.
The angels and all the other very good creatures of Allah. They simply greet one another with the salam.
MashaAllah.
Now we welcome you again to another continuation of our session. Remember, we are talking about science and the technology and the participation of Muslims in that domain, because our problem statement is that we don't see enough participation
of the Muslim community.
Yes, there is some participation, but it is simply too small. Yet we all agree that ultimately our forefathers, the Muslims, did a lot of work.
Yes, yes.
And a lot of contribution to this domain in its early stage. Imagine today we already have all these very major tools that help in innovation, these computers and all the other things. So it should be a lot easier for our current generation to contribute. But unfortunately, you'll find that we are again not contributing enough. Yet our forefathers did a lot of contribution. So today we are going to be trying to look at some of those inventions that changed the direction of the world of science, and they were done by Muslims.
By Muslims.
That will be our focus.
Thank you very much, Brother Ssekalema. So last week, like I told our viewers, we were looking at the foundations of science as a field, and today we want to look at the contribution of Muslims to science and technology. Maybe for starters, as a Muslim, of course, science should be one of the things that should help you understand your creator better, right? I think before we can go into the contribution, could you try to throw us light on how a Muslim should appreciate his God, who is creator Allah, basing on scientific concepts that he has put in the Quran, inshallah.
Now, one thing we should realize is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us an indication that He is invisible, but His signs are available for us to contemplate.
Contemplate, yes.
So in many verses, He talks of the creations, but brings them in the form of signs. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُمْ مِنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. So he starts with min ayatihi, meaning if you want to appreciate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you simply look at what He has creation. Inna fi khalqi samawati wal ardi wa ikhtilafi al-layli wan nahari la ayatin li ulil albab. So you can see that He's talking of creation of particular elements that we see in the world in which we live, but He's bringing them forward as min ayatihi, things that we should contemplate about. So as we discover more of the behavior of things that we can see, it should be something to reinforce, because if Allah has told you that inna fi khalqi samawati wal ard, and today we have a whole domain of space exploration and space sciences, they have discovered so many things. It means that should be just a reinforcement of the Muslim. the Muslim should now be able to even go further, because at first, during the time the Quran was revealed, the ayah talking about khalaqa samawati wal ard was a bit not very well understood, because they didn't really have much information about the samawat. But for us now, we have comprehensive information about the samawat. A lot of details, how many planets, the galaxies, so many things that are simply extraordinary. And it should be something that reinforces our iman, just like Allah has said that in the ayah, those that have knowledge are the ones that fear.
That fear Allah. Inama yakhsha Allah
min ibadihi
al-ulama. Yes.
So that's the whole concept that we are trying to push forward.
Oh, mashallah.
The emphasis on a bias towards the sciences.
Okay, thank you very much. So in other words, the viewer out there, as a Muslim, you should know that science should help you appreciate who Allah is, by looking at the different creations He has put in place for us. And if you make the effort to appreciate them in the scientific context, perhaps it helps you know that some of the things didn't come by accident, but rather it was the work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Brother Ssekalema, kindly share with us some of the contributions of Islam or Muslims towards the field of science and technology. Yes, please.
Now, let's look at a few of them. No. Of course, there are very many, but the program may not allow us to do a lot of that. But we are simply citing these as an illustration of what can happen if only we provided some kind of dedication.
Yes, please.
Now, you see these cameras that we use today.
No.
The cameras were first invented by a Muslim. His name was Ibn al-Haytham.
Ibn al-Haytham.
Now, Ibn al-Haytham realized or came up with the idea that actually you can be able to see something that is far, and you are able to project it on a smaller screen.
Yes, please.
Meaning, for example, I can see you in your full form, but can I be able to project a reduced version of that picture I'm seeing on a smaller screen? And that is the whole idea about cameras. So he discovered that if you can pass light through a small hole, meaning you are seeing something far and big, but you pass that light through a small hole, that light can actually be able to put focus on what you are seeing the other side, but in a reduced form. And that's the whole idea of pinhole camera. I think you remember those simple
senior 1, senior 2 physics. I remember. Yes.
Although the way they teach the students, they don't really give them an impression that this is something from which you can start and move forward. So from pinhole camera, we begin to advance up to the very extremely good cameras that we have today. Even the telescopes that we are using for space exploration, all these are just an improvement of the entire concept of camera. And this is just something that we see coming from Ibn Haytham. Now, you realize that sometimes the inventions were not necessarily coming from zero. For example, they illustrate here that some of the ideas that he used, he picked from some Chinese. So the Chinese had gone a bit of some distance in thinking about the way light behaves, but for him, he made it into something practical that can be used, and the camera became something that we know today, and it is available now in a far more condensed form. We have the very large cameras that we use in our studios, and the simple one that you have on your smartphone. So that is one thing that we credit ourselves, particularly Ibn al-Haytham, for that innovation of the camera.
Okay. Maybe before we go to the second contributor or contribution,
yes,
you can help the viewers to put the innovator in context. Which century was that, and perhaps which year?
Ibn al-Haytham, they are saying here, it was the 10th century.
10th century.
So imagine, 10th century, we are talking of
1000 and...
No, that is 10. You count the centuries
ahead of the...
With 1 year behind, I think. So in case you are talking of 10th century, you are talking of
900 AD, as is stated in
so by 10th century, Muslims are busy discovering things. So it becomes very shameful that 21st century, the Muslims are busy just consuming what others are discovering, yet their forefathers were at the forefront in all these discoveries. So that is 10th century.
10th century, okay. Thank you very much.
The other interesting innovation which really revolutionized the way people travel around the world was the very first world map.
World map.
Now, a map is very critical in travel.
Yes.
Because ultimately, once you have a map, the rest is very simple. Now, this map was drawn, and they are saying it was 3 meter. So 3 meters is what size? Considerably a large piece.
Yes.
So it was drawn out by a Muslim called Al-Idrisi. Now, Al-Idrisi lived in the period between 1100, which is 1100, yes. 1100 to 1166. Okay. You can see he lived for just a few years, maybe 66 years.
66 years, yes.
Which falls within what the Prophet gave us as our lifeline.
Lifeline.
So the Prophet emphasized that my ummah will live between
60 to 70.
So it's very normal. So this man here was originally living in that very good place called Andalusia. Now Andalusia is that part we call Spain.
Spain today.
The Muslims went to Spain coming from Africa. So they crossed the Mediterranean and invaded and took over Spain, and they created a civilization that has not been rivaled, at least comparing it to the time in which it were. So this man came up with a world map, clearly showing the various continents and etc., including the seas. So what we see as Vasco da Gama has gone to discover India, these men were not moving in darkness. They already had these maps. Because the way they used to travel, they knew where they were going. It's not like they were just meandering around in the oceans. But the way they tell you, he was the first one to discover sea route to India. He didn't discover the sea route to India. He simply went there to confirm
what
these maps that
some of them had
because these maps are 1100.
And Vasco da Gama is between 14.
So it is a lot later, but the maps were already in place. That is another contribution that the Muslims made. And the maps, of course, nowadays we even have Google Maps that are active. You can be able to do so many things. Okay. Then the other contribution is in the area of surgery. Now surgery, first of all, is something quite interesting. How did someone sit down and think that if a person is sick and the sickness is physical and it is inside, you can be able to cut open the body of this person, remove this impurity and put the body back?
Yes, please.
So this is the idea of Al-Zahrawi.
Al-Zahrawi.
Unfortunately, they have not put the time in which. Oh, they are saying 10th century.
10th century as well.
So 10th century is still
900. Okay.
Now, 10th century, we have a Muslim surgeon called Al-Zahrawi. And he also lived in Cordoba. Cordoba is still also in that area of Spain. So Cordoba, you can see Spain. The majority of discoveries were actually in that Andalusia area, where we have Cordoba and some of the others. So what did this man do for us? One, he discovered that process of treating through opening the human body and removing an impurity that is causing illness. Because primarily the normal way of treating illnesses is you swallow medicine, and the medicine goes in there and does whatever it does. So he came up with the first idea that why don't we simply cut? But remember that the human being is very volatile inside there. A small infection can cause death. So it means you have to think of how do I preserve this person? I'm cutting them open, but how do I ensure that there's no bacteria coming in, etc. All these are things that this surgeon thought about. He went ahead and even created specialized instruments that can do this work. Very sharp knives that we call scalpels nowadays, and so many other things. Okay. And he even went further to document, because you know, within the domain of discovery, there is the disease of documentation. Sometimes we make the discoveries, but we are simply too lazy to write out what we have discovered. So in case you die, a very big part of the knowledge may end up dying with you because it's not documented anyway. This man went ahead to even document and to write manuals. If you want to operate part X, follow this process. So this is all contribution by our Muslims. Then the issue of flying. Flying is nowadays one of the best ways of travel.
Air travel.
Air travel, as we may call it.
Okay.
So this air travel was discovered by, the initial form was discovered by Abbas ibn Firnas.
But we hear of the White brothers.
Now the White brothers are very recent.
They are recent?
They are very recent. This man here, they are saying, was a alleged 9th century inventor.
9th century.
So you can see that although we know these European names, also discovery is something very prestigious, and every civilization will want to portray itself as having been
initiated
at the forefront. So you'll find a lot of the literature that we cover in our education system here in Uganda largely portrays the majority of discoveries as having been done by Europeans. But the good thing, they indicate the date. So meaning if someone tells me they discovered something in the 16th, and I have another one that discovered it in the 9th century, it cancels itself out naturally. So this man here discovered the first flying object. So what he created didn't have an engine. The Wright brothers attached an engine to their discovery. Also, the engine had been invented, so they thought, okay, this thing, we want it to fly.
Okay.
Actually, the Wright brothers are honored for having invented something that could allow them to fly across a very large area like the Atlantic. Because the Atlantic is a large ocean. Imagine the kind of risk they took. You get into something you've invented and you're crossing an ocean. So you can see it is major risky. Once you fall into that ocean, you are in as good as gone. But these ones, Ibn Firnas, for him, he created a glider. So he came up with a design that could allow a human being to attach himself to an object that has some kind of wing structure, and it could allow him to at least fly, especially from the side of a mountain, given that in that case you have the valley and it gives you a chance to fly. These are things that were essentially contributed by our brothers, our elders that came before us. Those and many other things are what you will find our ancestors have contributed. And it is something that we should do. Emulate. Think of how do we recover this glory of this man. There is a medical sciences. We have Ibn Sina. That one was another contributor. He even wrote a very large book on human physiology and anatomy. So it gave a lot of details about the structure of the human body and what is needed when we attempt to treat. So these are all things that we need to be aware of and to keep them as an inspiration for us.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brother Ssekalema Hamzah, for taking us through some of the contributions that the early Muslims made towards science and technology. Maybe somebody would want to appreciate and understand if majority of these innovations are in the 10th century, and our Messenger Muhammad lived the 6th century, if I may say so, 6th to 7th century. Could we say that these ones had a special, they were specially gifted, that for them 4th centuries later, the ones of, or could you have any cases of those Sahabas, the Abu Bakr, radiallahu anhu, Umar, or to the Tabi'in, the immediate successors of the Sahabas, who could have made some contributions before we come to these 10th century
people. Now we don't really have a lot of that. Now you realize that part of the propensity to discover is sometimes driven by some exposure to a specific knowledge domain. Now you'll find that during this time is when the Islamic system expanded, covered so many other areas. So starting from some simple physics and some simple discoveries that had been done by some of the people that were later under the Islamic Empire, it became a bit easier. Like we have said, nowadays it's very simple to invent complex technology because of the availability of computers. Meaning if you're going to invent something that flies, you no longer need to test it out with yourself. You don't have to risk that. The computer can do a model of an aircraft, you test it out, you subject it to all kinds of conditions, so that ultimately by the time you go out and build a prototype or something that you can enter in and try to fly, you have already done the biggest part of what would cause you problems.
Actually, what is interesting is I was interacting with one of the scientists and said if what you call a research or I don't know what they call it, for it to pass as something that is authentic, it needs to have gone at least 1,000 tests.
Yes,
different tests,
especially if it is in the health domain.
And the rest.
How much care you take in declaring or invention, it depends on what it's going to do. If something is going to be affecting human life, that case we eliminate risk 100%. We should be sure. So there are others. Jabir ibn Hayyan, Abu Musa, that one is, they are calling him father of chemistry.
Father of chemistry.
So that one lived in 721 to 815. You can see
that one is.
You can see, interestingly, they nearly lived in the same period. There seems to have been an era in which we see a lot of these innovations coming from these Muslims at nearly the same time.
Okay.
Al-Khawarizmi, that one was a mathematician. So he was in the area of mathematics, he was in the area of algebra, he was in the area of astronomy. That one lived in 770 to 840. You can see the times are also the same. So he made a lot of discoveries. And I understand he's even the one that came up with what we call Hindu Arabic numerals. This 1, 2, 3 up to. Remember, the first numbering schemes were originally created by these Romans.
By the Romans.
You know the way the Roman numbers are. 1 is an eye.
As an eye.
2 is 2 eyes.
2 eyes, then 3. Then
when
small eye.
When you get to 10, what does it become?
It is X.
Becomes an X. Now you can see that the pattern is not very simple. For example, if you are going to add 10 to 15,
this will be an X with a V.
So things were not very easy to
build from
to apply some kind of mathematical concepts, and I think that's what forced these men to go back to square zero and rethink. Because if you are going to invent mathematics and do a lot of calculations, there's no way you would implement using the XMLs and all the other things that
actually, I remember in our primary, the most challenging aspect of mathematics was to convert numbers from Hindu Arabic to Roman. It was very tough.
The symbols, and there you are just talking of the basic numbers. But how about if you are going to do calculations
advanced mathematics?
So these men came up with those numbers that are very simple, and there was a lot of collaboration. So these men, although we are listing them here as having been the pioneers, they didn't work alone.
Yes, please.
The industry was very vibrant. The Muslim empire encouraged the people to study and learn. Because remember, we said earlier on that there is no collision between the sciences that we can see and we can feel with the concepts of Islam. They are all min ayatillah. So it was very simple, and the support they received was very enormous.
Okay.
Physics. There is Ibn Ishaq.
Ibn Ishaq
al-Kindi. Ibn Ishaq al-Kindi lived in 800 to 873. You see the number of years.
1873.
The Prophet tells us. There was Ibn Rabban, 837 to 870. So these are all men that are adding value to the area of science and discovery. Ibn Sina. Now, the other interesting thing about some of these scientists we are talking about, because some of their contributions became a foundation for European renaissance in knowledge, the Europeans changed their names. For example, you see this person called Ibn Sina.
Okay.
When you go to the literature in the West, you'll find they call him Avicenna.
Avicenna. Okay. Brother Ssekalema, we should take a breather and have a short break. We shall continue from, you called him who?
Ibn Sina.
Ibn Sina, inshallah. So, dear viewers, we shall be starting right there, inshallah, after the break.
Eno ye Salam TV. Explore, enjoy and dance to the latest content, beats and kawozi from Uganda and beyond. Simply go to your Play Store or App Store right now, find Afro Mobile, download it straight to your phone and get started. Is it TV you want? Simply open the app, click on TV, select the channel you want and watch live. Are you busy right now? Then check out On Demand or enjoy in your free time. Afro Mobile. The future is now.
Twake for our teams. Ignite your color with Plascon, proud partner of Uganda Sports. Color your world.
Better steady, be better.
I'm a victim in a bank where I discovered that somebody had used my account to make online purchases. And these online purchases, actually I had bought something from very far. I had not bought that. So I wondered, I said, I have not made this online purchase, and it was in millions. So I said, how? So when I went to check in the bank, I realized that somebody had actually used my account fraudulently and bought something online, and money was deducted from my account in millions. So I call on fellow Ugandans and the world that be careful with your bank cards, because anybody can learn on any slightest information and use that. Better steady, be better.
Better steady, be better.
In partnership with Uganda Communications Commission, Bank of Uganda, MTN Uganda, Equity, Uganda Bankers Association, Post Bank, United Media, Stanbic Bank, and MTN Momo.
Eno, yes, Salam TV.
Dear viewer, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I welcome you back from the short break that we have just come from. Our program is Alhidaayah, and the topic we are covering is science and technology in Islam. Your host is Muohammad Ssekalala. With me is a guest that is called Mr. Ssekalema Hamzah, a lecturer at the Islamic University in Uganda. So before we went to the break, we were looking at the contribution of the early Muslims largely in the 8th to the 10th century, and the contribution they made towards science and technology, as trying to reflect on what should be our role as the current generation of Muslims, of appreciating the past, perhaps also help us get inspired in seeing what contributions we can make in the field of science and technology. So Brother Ssekalema, we had listed a number of them, and we had ended on the last one being Ibn Sina, who you said in the European literature is called Al-Visi. So kindly throw some light on him, and then
they call him Avicenna. Now they were forced to mention some of these names.
Yes.
Because these names were the center of literature.
No.
Now, for example, that man wrote a very important book on anatomy, and it was used until very recently when they made a few updates and they could no longer be using that kind of book. So it became important that they mentioned, but they essentially changed, because if you find the name Avicenna, do you really have any way of imagining that this is even a person connected
you
with?
wouldn't.
But how can Ibn become Avi? So, but we may not blame them, because ultimately everyone wants to to portray themselves as being at the forefront of discovery. So it is something that is political.
Okay.
And we may just stop it at that.
Thank you very much. Now, fast forward, you know, history helps you to define your present as you prepare for the future.
Exactly.
Now, to us, the current generation of Muslims, is there any particular factor or matter of science and technology that we need to take note of as Muslims to help us perhaps prepare for the future well as the current generation of Muslims?
Now, one thing that we should note about this area of knowledge,
yes,
is that it is quite expensive.
Science.
The entire area of scientific discovery, it's not something cheap. So meaning the very first thing that you have to be ready to part with in case you are going to be making these discoveries is a considerable amount of money. So we now have a list here that shows the kind of dedication in terms of investment in research and development that countries are putting in, and we compare it with what our Muslim countries are putting in. By Muslim countries, we are talking of countries that have a large
Muslim majority
of Muslim.
Muslim majority countries.
Now, in terms of billions of United States dollars,
yes,
because the US dollar is generally the international currency, unless we get the new one coming from BRICS. So the US alone spends $727 billion on research and development. One country like this.
$720 billion.
$720 billion. What's the size of the Ugandan economy?
We are told currently, no, okay, going by the budget that was just passed, was it above 54 trillion?
Uganda shillings.
Uganda shillings.
Meaning
so
if you convert to dollar,
I think our
yeah, like 2 billion.
It should be. Let me.
So imagine just a mere 2 billion, the entire budget. These ones are spending 727 billion USD to fund research and development. And the other interesting thing about scientific research and development is that you can even spend that money and you come out not having succeeded in the discoveries.
Actually, if you use the conversion rate of 3,600, our budget will be 15 million US dollars.
15 million.
15 million US
Okay.
dollars.
Now 15 million, that's the entire one.
Entire one.
These ones are spending 727 just on research and development. So when a country spends these kinds of resources to ensure that they are ahead of others, there's really no way you're going to compete with them. The second, and in terms of part of their gross domestic income, it is just around 2.9%.
2.9%.
Meaning they have a lot of money, but 2.9% of that is what they dedicate to research and development. The next one in that series is China.
China.
And we know very well the position of China nowadays.
Yeah, globally.
Essentially, nearly everything in manufacturing is coming from China.
Yes, please.
Even phones that are of very advanced appearance and they make us very proud, the iPhones and some of the others, they are still produced in China. Yes, the designs and the engineering is done by the Americans, but they produce them in China. So China spends 556 billion US dollars on research and development. What is the percentage of their income? 3.1.
3.1. So it's slightly higher than the US
in terms of percentage.
Percentage.
The next one are the Japanese. So Japan spending 269.
I think apart from China, Japan and US are in the G7 countries, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
So 269 is what Japan is spending.
Okay.
But interestingly, for Japan, the percentage is a bit bigger. For out of their income, it is 4.75. Actually, they have nearly the biggest percentage, which I will see some others. So the amount per se is 269 billion USD. Percentage of income is 4.7%. Now you can see that we hardly find any Muslim country
in the top 3.
Among the top 3.
Top 3 economy.
Let's look at a surprising one. Israel. Israel is a very tiny country somewhere in the Middle East. They spend, I think, the biggest percentage, 5.9%.
What position is Israel?
Israel is number 19.
Number 19. Wow.
So, but before Israel, because we were bringing up Israel because of its really very small size relative to so many other countries in the Muslim world. But the very first one among the Muslim countries that you'll find is Turkey. Now, Turkey, you'll find it's spending 26 billion USD on research and development. And for anyone that follows the trends, you know that this Turkey is actually moving at a very fast pace in terms of ability to manufacture high-end goods. Nowadays, some of their military equipment is setting the standard. These TB2 drones and so many other things.
Okay. So Turkey is number 21.
So Turkey is number 15.
15.
That's the very first of the Muslim countries that are in this list.
Oh, so it is at a higher position than Israel.
Than even Israel.
Okay.
Now, if we are to look only at the Muslim countries, the next one comes at number 26.
26.
And that is Malaysia, 11.1 billion.
11.1 billion.
That's what they are spending. And in terms of percentage of their income, it's 1.5%. Then Indonesia is 10.
I'm not seeing our petrodollar countries, the ones that have made a name for mining.
So
oil.
Interestingly, there are some African countries that are above some of our very well-known Muslim. Within Africa, we have South Africa, which spends 6.6 billion. South Africa is number 33. Number 33.
Indonesia, you said, is what position?
Indonesia is 27.
27.
The next Muslim country is Egypt, number 32.
Wow.
With 6.8 billion. So you see that they try, but compared to other countries that are currently leading the trend, you can see that these are mega contributions. There's no way you can compete with the guy who has put in 727 billion. And you have put in only 6 or whatever. Although they also put in, because remember we have seen ours is 15, the entire economy. So if a person, an African country is dedicating half of it just to R&D, it's something quite interesting. Number 36 is the United Arab Emirates.
So that's the first petrodollar country.
It's number
UAE. By the other, a few months ago, we had a video clip that was circulating on social media of what they called the modern library, 21st century library, and it was on its own with about 7 levels, and
library or museum?
It was the library. It was
the
library.
It's a library. Now, for the UAE has some interesting ideas. For them, they created what they call a museum of the future.
Museum of the future, yes.
So you realize that museums are usually stores of things that have happened in the past. So for them, their concept of museum of the future, it is also in line with what we are trying to push forward here, encouraging the Muslim community to focus
on
science and technology. So for them, what they did, they put up an area where inventions that are expected to come out, maybe in some few years to come at production level, they have them there. Very modern flying equipment and etc. You put them there. So that a person who wants to see how aircraft will look in the next 10 years will just be able to find it there. So it's an interesting idea, and possibly that's how some of these countries are coming up. So this entire list is composed of very few Muslim countries. Remember, they cut off only the first 90 countries. So countries that are investing way less, they are not even including them in this list. And in that case, of course, we can't even mention our dear Uganda, because
our dear Uganda is also
an OIC.
It is an OIC member country.
But what we are saying is the investment is simply very small. And the smaller the investment, then the outcome will also be commensurately small. So that one is now at an international level. Then locally here, the situation, of course, the country itself is not really very good at science and technology, but in terms of at least involvement, meaning if I went to, for example, a university like Makerere, which is a government-funded university, and I try to do a tracer study of how many of our Muslim brothers and sisters are actually doing programs that are related with the science and technology, you'll find the numbers are extremely small. If you went to the medical school, and you looked at the 150, 200 students that are under the government sponsorship scheme, you find that the number of Muslims is still very small. Some look at it as an issue of difficulty. Mathematics is simply too difficult. So people tend to find a way of just branching off to the easiest thing they can do. So we will find we tend to take on the courses that are related with our religion. The person will do Arabic because it is part of your day-to-day life. So studying it is something that should be coming up easy. Or you do Islam, the religion itself. Or some would do history. So the tendency to drift towards the subjects that are perceived as easy exists, and unfortunately it is partially sponsored by the schools themselves.
Yes.
So we shall possibly look at more detail maybe next time when we meet to try and see why do we see this trend of really non-participation. We've seen at an international level, entire countries are not really doing a lot of participation, but even locally, just at the level of exposure, let this person do a scientific domain. Granted, we don't do a lot of innovations here in Uganda, but at least let's participate. Of course, if you're already on the road to science, the inventions can find you there. Even sciences that don't require a lot of resources. For example, the computer-based sciences. Because the advantage with computer-based sciences, those ones you don't need a lot of resources. If you're going to do research in materials engineering, and those are complex things, and you need to go and do a lot of mining, and so you need a lot of money. But the simpler one, something like computing, you still find the participation is actually not very big. Granted, if you went to Islamic University in Uganda, you'd find there many Muslims doing our courses. But you may still find that, yes, granted, we do study the courses, but in terms of finally what is the output, do we see a lot of innovations that are being driven by, remember recently the government released us on the issue of Islamic banking.
Islamic banking, yes.
Meaning you don't really have a lot of software products or IT-driven innovations that are in support of this new domain, because all the others are just driven by the normal banking infrastructure. So that problem of non-participation is something that we see, and it needs to be addressed. At least even if we start with just advocacy.
Yes, please.
We should be able to improve attitude. Let the attitude at least be positive. There was one time I was interacting with a student from Tanzania.
Yes, please.
And for them, they were saying that in their country, math is actually the easiest subject.
Mathematics. Mention that to Ugandan students.
They were saying what is hard is again English.
Because they're used to Swahili.
So they find that English now a problem. But for us here, our English is a bit easy. People know how to speak it and to work with it.
Yes.
But again, mathematics is considered. So it means attitudes tend to influence the way people. Because you can't tell me that people that are in Tanzania are not considering math to be a particular problem. And here we see it is nearly a caste subject. A student fears that subject from right away from senior one. And it ends up being a bias away from the sciences. Yet the government has actually even put up now the scheme of giving science teachers a lot more
money.
remuneration than their arts counterparts. Of course, there was a lot of noise from the arts group saying, no, all of us are important. Yes, we are all important, but ultimately our contribution to human life differs. A doctor that finds you dying and puts you back is not comparable to one that will tell you how Obote became the president of Uganda and how he finally, yes, they are all adding some knowledge, but the sensitivity of contribution does differ. So that is what we could say about the issue of are we really participating?
Okay, thank you very much. So dear viewer, in the second segment of the show we have noted that science and technology is an expensive field, and perhaps the low participation of the Muslim community is largely to the fact that the money, funding and resources that are needed to come up with serious innovations in science and technology requires that we have made a lot of effort. Perhaps majority of us are still in slumberland because we are comfortable always. You go and you learn your basic Islam. Alhamdulillah, you find things are moving on well. But in the fact, when it comes to doing things that are really big and matter, you find that our contribution is low. So we hope that with this kind of insight and spotlight that we've given you, it should impact and spur into you the need to see that we work harder in the current circumstances to see what contribution we can make towards science and technology. So the schools out there, we have a big task to accomplish. The elders, those that have been exposed, you've traveled far and wide, you really need to do something to see that we change the perception and attitude, like Brother Ssekalema has told us. In Tanzania, mathematics is easy. In Uganda, we know English. We know English, so you find it is a question of attitude and perception toward the given field. So we hope that through this show, we are going to try to see how we throw more light and help the Muslim out there appreciate the fact that they need to equally go on that table that is discussing science and technology, seeing what is the input that is required of you, what is the contribution that is expected of the different stakeholders, among others. Inshallah, your parting shot, Brother Ssekalema. Any final word as we are wrapping up the show?
Okay, for today's program, we have emphasized that ultimately the Muslims have been instrumental in this area of science and technology, especially in its infant stage.
Okay.
That is one. Then two, at the time when they were prominent, it was not that they were using only resources coming from Muslims. There was a lot of interaction with between inventors in Europe, inventors in China, inventors in Arabia. So it was really an issue of interaction. And because the regime, the Muslim regime, was supportive of the discoveries and so many things, we see that people would be free to explore and to make all these discoveries. So it means therefore that once we have the correct attitude, then we should be able to work widely. We may not necessarily fix ourselves only to the Muslim community, but what we are saying is let the Muslims participate fully in this domain. And at all levels. Let's encourage our young children to feel that there is need to invent things.
So the parent out there needs to create an environment for his 3-4 year kids.
So the good thing, the new curriculum for secondary school tries to emphasize the issue of competence. Meaning they are moving at least away from over-theorization
of things.
So that would be something good, but as you may realize, like we have said, this domain is expensive, and you'll find many of the schools are not willing to inject the necessary resources. And once the schools are not putting enough investment, yes, the students could try to push and imagine, but ultimately is the way you are capped by the non-existence of funding. And of course, even the way you learn, because if the school, for example, has a class of 150 students, these people are supposed to be creating groups for purposes of learning. Now 150, how many groups are you going to create?
There will be so many.
One, the groups themselves can be so many. Then two is that the number of people per group, 150. And you're forced to create like a group of 10.
Of course, of 10.
Now once you create a group of 10, you are already sabotaging, because this group of 10, the maximum participation you can get active is 4. So the majority would end up there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ssekalema Hamzah, for trying to, should I say, instigate the aspect of us appreciating the fact that science is very important and part of the Muslim community. So dear viewer, today has been largely to show us the contribution of the Muslim early century, the ancient Muslim communities towards science and technology, and then what is currently being done in terms of science and technology globally and locally here in the country, and then what should be our role going forward. Inshallah, we hope that with the insight we've got, it can help us change our attitude and perception. But we shall be continuing with this discussion in the subsequent programming. Thank you very much again for being part of the show. We shall continue appreciating the feedback you're giving us in the different social media platforms. On YouTube, we are there. You can also follow us on the Afro mobile app, plus Twitter, Facebook, among others. Thank you very much. I've been your host, Muohammad Ssekalala. Till next time, we'll be glad to have you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam.
Eno, yes, Salam TV.